We think patients would benefit from any consistency or any improvement in the value of medicines developed, but also the consistency of the level of access to medicines, and would also benefit from being able to influence those people who are making decisions about which medicines they can access. And I think that would be extremely valuable to get the patient insight there. And healthcare providers, people making actual coverage decisions, where to incorporate new medicines into clinical guidelines, would benefit from being able to bring that insight into, again, the access decision-making, the approval bodies, to be able to sort of say what matters to the healthcare system should be reflected in the regulatory and HTA processes. I've got a couple of slides here on the deliverables of the full project. I've talked briefly about the need for a framework which can, and scientific underpinning that can be brought to the questions. But very briefly, I think we would like to understand how relative effectiveness as a question is framed, how it is framed by different decision makers, so that we can start with the question, the right question. A framework for the assessment of the value of information, operational feasibility, and interaction with the decision-making processes. A toolbox I've talked about of the different types of studies that are registration or not registration. A hierarchy of evidence for the evidence synthesis that I talked about earlier. An evidence-based decision tool would be very welcome to try and bring some consistency across HTA in the selection of appropriate comparators. And detailed governance of a practical nature, how to do real-world effectiveness research in a pre-launch environment. I don't know if I have time for one case study. Last slide. Yeah. This at GSK we were looking and have started a very pragmatic randomized trial in COPD in a real-world situation in Salford in the UK, near Greater Manchester. We had a clear strategic need that the value of a new ICS-LABA would be driven by the effectiveness against existing treatments of COPD. We had a strategic insight that the sort of information that we wanted to generate would be valued by NICE in the UK and was also subject to review by the MHRA. But we left with significant strategic uncertainty when we're looking for approval for funding this study. The strategic uncertainty, as I said, should this be a 3B study? Could it wait to be a phase 4 study? Is UK data going to be acceptable across Europe? What's the impact on the regulatory process? How do we know, does this meet any needs, or does it in fact complicate the processes in the US? So there were a lot of strategic uncertainty. Ultimately, the value of information was seen to be great enough to continue with investment in the study. But then we had a whole round of operational uncertainty. How do you find the right electronic healthcare record systems that allow you to do very pragmatic research? How do can you find linkages between primary, secondary care and pharmacy information? How do you get a regulatory permission to expose a whole lot, hundreds or thousands more patients to an investigational compound? What are the appropriate sizes of the study? What are the appropriate safety monitoring issues? There's a whole lot of operational issues that had to be tackled to even do this study. And then we still are left with our analytical uncertainty. How will we present findings from one country and make them relevant around Europe, or even to countries outside of Europe? So some very specific issues there, which we feel sort of illustrates in one example why this topic is so important for industry. The decision to do one study was a painful internal process, and it would be very much facilitated by having greater certainty and a greater understanding of the public-private interaction in this space. For questions, I'd like to introduce Tahsin Salimi from Sanofi, the co-lead company, who's also available to answer questions. But that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.